Instead of the mindset of being sort of a warrior and having that mentality for a police officer, we want to get to a point where a police officer's mentality is more of a guardian for the community. That they're there to keep the community safe. They're there to have the community's back. And that the folks that they interact with, even the folks that they ultimately may have to arrest for a commission of a crime, they are still a part of that community.
Hey guys, welcome back to the SituAsian Room, a journey into Asian America. We dive deep into the issues in the Asian American community, from questions like, where are you really from? And representation, to sharing food and our own experiences. My name is Emilie Villaverde.
And I'm Zach King. This week we interview Rahat Babar. He's an incredible guy. I like to refer to him as a super lawyer. He currently works as special counsel for litigation for the governor's office in New Jersey, but he's here to represent himself, or on behalf of himself. He's the former president of the Asian American Bar Association of Pennsylvania. We talk about a lot of interesting and important topics, from community engagement to the relationship that law enforcement has with communities of color, the importance of communities of color supporting each other, and much more.
Yeah, guys, this is an incredible interview. I had a lot of fun recording this, and I'm really excited for you guys to tune in to the stories that Rahat shares with us and with you guys. But before we jump into the interview, let's talk some current events. Zach, this is episode 10.
This is episode 10. Thank you all for listening and making it this far with us. It's been an incredible journey so far into Asian America.
Yes, thank you guys. We can't thank you enough for all of your support, for tuning into our episodes every week. It's been an incredible journey, and I'm so glad that we're still on it.
And if you haven't done these things, but you want to keep supporting us, because we do need your support to keep on going and making way more episodes past episode 10, please make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, give our videos likes, share it with your friends especially. That's huge. Give us ratings on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. Subscribe to us on any platform that you use to listen to us. Follow us on social media. We're on all the basic social medias. All of that can be in our show notes. But thank you all so much for supporting us this far, and we hope to keep on going.
Yes. Zach, let's talk current events. What do you got?
Let's do it. Okay. Well, not as exciting as episode 10 and a lot more depressing, but in Austin, Minnesota, a man's lawn was burned, and the burn signs read China virus. The man is of Chinese descent. And he's a pretty nice guy, and he's a leader in his community in Austin, and it's really disheartening to see the hate against Asians. And he doesn't like visibly look Asian, but his last name is Chow, I believe, and people still hate Asians in the world.
It's so sad to see, especially with everything happening because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Just anti-Asian racism is at an all-time high, and it's sad to see that this is how it is in the United States in certain areas, but this is also a really great opportunity for the Asian American community to just I guess join together and stand together and really make our voices heard.
Yeah.
So it's just, there's not much you can really do, but
Well, I mean, there's not much we can't be like, vigilantes, but we can raise our voices and band together, which is like a lot, and for people, like some people won't even do that. Like last episode, we talked about like the House resolution to get them like over 100 or so Republicans voted against that, which is pretty disgusting, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this is a topic and theme we're going to explore more in our interview as well.
Yes, but on a brighter note, Awkwafina, a queen, I love her as an actress. She is an iconic figure in the Asian American community. she just made the decision to donate part of her music sales to help New York City's at-risk Chinatown businesses, which I think is incredible because, like we've been mentioning, um, anti-Asian racism is at an all-time high, especially because of the COVID-19 pandemic. People are avoiding Asian-owned businesses, especially in New York City. And the Chinatown businesses are really taking a hit due to the pandemic. So this is a quote from Aquafina. She posted, with the rising rate of xenophobic hate crimes and an economic standstill leading to closures of legendary New York staples that I grew up with, I owe it to my family to help struggling businesses during this time. So I applaud Aquafina for taking this stand and trying to make a change and trying to put some good out into the world. She decided to donate part of her music sales to grassroots organizations, including Welcome to Chinatown, and two other initiatives, including the hashtag They Can't Burn Us All movement, which is something that we talked about in past episodes during our current event bit. And it's just, it just makes me really happy to see that people are taking a stand with this.
Yeah, me too. Shout out Aquafina for doing awesome things for our community.
Love her.
Yeah. Well, let's get into our topic interview with Rahat Babar. All right, welcome Rahat Babar to the SituAsian Room. We're so excited to have you. So first, why don't we get started and let's have the audience give the audience a chance to know you a little bit. Tell us about yourself, your involvement in the Asian American community. I know you've got a hell of a resume.
No, thank you, Zach. Thank you, Emilie, for having me here today. I guess I'll start from the beginning, and please stop me if I'm going too long. But I am the son of immigrants. I was born in the Midwest in Oklahoma. My parents, when I was young, we moved around a lot. My parents themselves, they immigrated to the United States in the 1970s from Bangladesh. I think a story and a journey that's similar to so many of our parents in our community and the Asian American community coming to the US for a search of a better life for themselves, for their children. And so coming to the United States, they moved around a lot. I was born in Oklahoma, which in and of itself can be a story. But then after I was born, we moved around a lot and we settled in Philadelphia, where I ultimately spent most of my formative years growing up in West Philadelphia. Eventually, we did move out to the suburbs of Philadelphia, but grade school, high school, college was all in Philly. And then kind of fast forwarding a bit from growing up in Philadelphia, growing up, and at the time was not a large, and to pick one segment of the APA community, not a large Bangladeshi community in Philadelphia, or even in a lot of places in the US. We probably would see a lot more, and definitely see a lot more today in New York City, for example, or LA. But at the time, it was a very small community, and it was rare to see someone growing up that looked like me or even us at the time. But of course, times have changed. I've gone to college, gone to law school, and essentially spent the good part of my legal career in public service, working in state government, both at the Attorney General's office here in New Jersey and currently at the Governor's office in New Jersey, and currently overseeing litigation for the governor. I should say probably at this moment that I'm here personally in my personal capacity. I don't represent the views of any public official, any state official in New Jersey. I'm here on my own accord, and anything I say is attributed to me and no one else's fault but mine.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Rahat, for joining us here in the SituAsian Room. We're really excited to have you. So I'm just going to kick us off with a couple questions. So there's a big notion that there are no problems for Asian Americans, but you're a passionate lawyer who's been extensively involved in the Asian Pacific American Bar Association, which aims to address critical issues in the AAPI community. What are just some of the, I guess, civil rights threats to the AAPI community? What are we facing today, really?
Sure. Today, I mean, unfortunately, what we see today has been an issue for the Asian American community for quite some time. Unfortunately, what we see in 2020, as both of you are well aware, is the rise of acts of hate against Asian Americans. Unfortunately, we see this especially as it intersects with the current COVID pandemic that we're all experiencing. Where unfortunately, as COVID came around and has entered, the general consciousness, there are folks who are unfortunately being motivated in response and blaming Asian Americans in some respects for COVID, which is really quite irrational, and of course it's unacceptable. And unfortunately, here we are in August of 2020, and we still hear incidents of hate, acts of hate that are perpetrated against Asian Americans. I can give you one quick example. Just a couple of weeks ago, there was an Asian American woman in Philadelphia. She was pregnant at the time, and she was unfortunately a victim of an assault by an individual who, as she was being attacked, according to media reports, the perpetrator, yelled out a racial epithet, calling into account her race. So unfortunately, this is just one incident here in Philadelphia, but unfortunately, we are hearing of incidents and seeing incidents throughout the country. And this is currently just one huge challenge that is facing the Asian American community, a challenge that is not unique, as you both well know, in the history of Asian Americans in the United States, but it is rearing its head today. So that I would say is one example. And the second front, I would say, is when it comes to immigration and the policy surrounding immigration in the United States. Obviously, as we know, the topic of immigration is subject to so much political debate today and for the past who knows how many years. It always seems to be a topic of conversation and of political debate. But unfortunately, as we see the immigration debate play out, there are certain issues that simply intersect and disproportionately impact many Asian Americans in our communities, whether it's policies that we've seen that seem to be targeting or at least disproportionately impacting international students from China, for example, to the current debate for our dreamers, a good proportion of which are Asian Americans. And it's beyond unfortunate, and that's probably the understatement of the year, that Congress and the federal government can't get to a point where we can provide relief to our dreamers. So again, I mean, even though it's more intersecting with immigration, but I mean, in my view, it is also a civil rights issue. It's about these young people who know no other home but the United States, and their status and their presence is called into jeopardy because we can't solve this issue. So at least those are, and happy to talk about more, but those are the two that I can think of that is fairly forefront, I think, among, in terms of challenges to the Asian American community.
Yeah, definitely. And, we actually talked about, Zach and I talked about that case of that pregnant woman in Philadelphia. We talked about that on one of our previous episodes. And, it's crazy that this is all happening within just the AAPI community. Another question I wanted to ask you was, how do these intertwine with other communities of color? Because I know you mentioned, a lot with immigration, and I know it's not just a problem that the AAPI community faces. It's so much more than that.
Yes. So as it intersects with the communities of color, other communities of color, you are absolutely right. And like in my view, the common thread when it comes to these acts of hate against Asian Americans, and of course we see acts of hate against so many other communities of color, and the list, unfortunately, is rather large, and the acts that we've seen over the many years. But the common thread, in my view, is that for communities of color, when these acts of hate come and when we experience them, not only the victim, but our communities experience them so viscerally, it is a reminder there are folks out there that consider members of these communities, of our communities, as the other, as not part of the fabric of the United States, that we don't belong here, right? That I feel is what the message is being conveyed, that we should not be a part of our communities, that we grow up here and we live. And that is, the common thread that I see when it comes to the acts of hate against Asian Americans and the acts of hate that we see against, let's say, the Jewish community, the Black community, the Latino community, and it goes on. And so, and I think, that brings up a good point, as, not to put all the communities of color into one bucket, for example, because we bring not only do we individually bring our own experiences, unique experiences to bear, but also our communities have different histories too. And as we know, like, there isn't one common history within the Asian American community. We know there's no common history among other communities of color, and we should appreciate that, right? But I think in appreciating the different histories that involve our communities, at the same time, there are, whether it's alliances or support that we can give to each other in the challenges that we're facing. So I think that's important too, that when acts of hate, and we've seen this, whether it's in Philadelphia and other places in the country, where acts of hate are being perpetrated against Asian Americans, we have our friends in other communities speaking up loudly and condemning those actions, right? The Anti-Defamation League is a great example of an organization that has done a lot of great work, and is hugely consistent in its condemnation against hate. And so many other organizations could provide that support too, and vice versa too. And I think incumbent on the Asian American community is to call out hate and injustice in whatever shape and form, impacting any other community as well.
That seems to be a common theme, I think, is that a lot of the discrimination is, because we're not accepted as, like, within the American narrative. How would you say is the best way, or a strategy or something, for Asian Americans and other minority communities to kind of assert our place in American society?
Sure. And I think, and hopefully I don't sound too trite, but honestly, I think a lot of it is becoming involved and getting civically engaged in whatever form that is. I think, and both of you, I think you may have covered this in a prior podcast, or maybe we've talked about this before. But certainly when it comes to the consciousness of the Asian American experience, the community, there was a huge awakening when the attack and the murder of Vincent Chin happened in Detroit. Mm-hmm. And that, and again, I'm probably I'm a little younger, so I wasn't around when that happened. But when I talk to folks who were at the forefront of that movement, they tell us that it was an awakening, and one of the primary motivating events for the Asian American community to wake up and say, you know what, we can no longer simply, live our life within the United States and try to provide for our family and try to provide for ourselves, but we need to do more. And that more is becoming engaged and advocating for our interests, for the advancement of Asian Americans. And that, not to go too long about Vincent Chin, but that whole experience was a huge testament to folks coming together, in the face of such injustice, and advocating and lobbying elected leaders and public officials on the local, state, and federal level to make our voices heard, right? And then I think that experience, follows so much progress that we have seen within the Asian American community. And so going back to your question, Zach, I think one thing is what we can do is to get involved. whether it's politically, civically, whether it's, getting involved in organizations, creating alliances and support with other organizations out there that are doing really good work. And, and of course, we can think about the many issues that pervade our society. I think, to me, at least the top of my head, that's one example where we can really advance where we are within the community.
Awesome. Yeah, no, thank you for that. Actually, before we move on to our next set of questions, we're actually going to take that quick break right now.
All right, guys, welcome back to the SituAsian Room. We have Rahat Babar with us. Rahat, again, like I said in the beginning, thank you for taking the time to be with us here in the SituAsian Room. One question that I wanted to ask you was about, so before we took our break, you talked about being engaged and being involved, whether it was civically or, within our, just whatever it means to just stand up and, get work done. How would you define community engagement, and what role does it have in a relationship with law enforcement and communities of color, really?
Sure. No, that's a great question. When it comes to and to focus when it comes to community engagement and law enforcement, we know that a divide is there. I mean, I don't have to go very far into what we've been seeing here in 2020 in terms of recent events, and unfortunately today with the shooting of Jacob Blake in Wisconsin. There, and it's there's a large history, right, when it comes to the divide that we see between communities of color and law enforcement, and there's so many layers. But I think, I know that there are certainly law enforcement agencies throughout the country that are trying their level best in reaching out to the community and establishing meaningful relationships, right? And also on the flip side, we see many community members also working towards building and improving that relationship, and that comes in many forms, right? And so now, in the middle of, or I shouldn't say in the middle of, but as we are living and seeing the movement of Black Lives Matter, and the many policy positions that are coming out of that movement, which all are worthy of some of debate and consideration, and hopefully we get there when it comes to reform. Though that's part of the discussion, right? When it comes to community engagement, and when I was working in this area a year or two ago, one of the things we would talk about is that and this cuts across many communities too, where when the interaction with law enforcement, the ideal is when folks in communities interact with law enforcement, the first time shouldn't be where there's a yellow police tape, or the first time shouldn't be when something has happened in your life that's probably a fairly negative experience at that moment in time, right? What we were trying to foster is a rapport, a relationship, um, an environment where communities are meeting, are developing relationships with law enforcement outside of that setting. So for example, I know, and it sounds fairly simple, it's like, at a picnic or at a community event or at a fair, right? Where you're having, without the police tape, without the stress of a horrible situation, you're having a conversation, right, with police officers in your community. And that's just the beginning, right? It's not obviously the end, but that's just the beginning when we talk about community engagement, where folks are actually coming together and having those really hard conversations. And it's not going to happen overnight. We're not going to bridge this divide overnight. This is a divide that's been building for decades, if not centuries. And we'd be remiss to say that, especially when it comes to the Black community and law enforcement, we know in our history that law enforcement was a tool to subjugate and to, I mean, more than just discriminate against African Americans in this country. They were the tool in bringing about that awfulness. And so that's not going to be easy to simply wash away. right? And not that we should. But those are the conversations we need to have. And I think that those conversations have certainly started, but there's a lot more to do.
Yeah. So in this reform, where does community policing play a role? Like, what is community policing? Could you talk about that with us a little bit?
Sure. No, and actually, for folks who are interested in community policing, probably do a much better job than I can to describe it, but there is a report that came out under President Obama's administration. I think it's called the 21st Century Task Force on Policing. And that report does an amazing job in outlining so many core principles when it comes to better policing, and that involves community policing. And I think some folks might make the mistake that community policing is like one thing that police should be doing. That okay, check the box. An officer should go and play basketball with some kids, one time a month or two times a month. And simply kind of checking off that box. But it's more than that. And I think there are definitely examples out there of leadership within law enforcement that infuses community policing in the very culture of the organization. And I think that's the ultimate goal. And when we talk about community policing, we're simply talking about police officers, as they're working, serving their shift or working their shift and serving the community, that the mindset is that instead of having, and I'm paraphrasing, Chief Thompson, who used to be the chief of the Camden Police Department, who has been a leader in this space, national leader in this space, instead of the mindset of being sort of a warrior and having that mentality for a police officer, we want to get to a point where a police officer's mentality is more of a guardian for the community. That they're there to keep the community safe. They're there to have the community's back. And that the folks that they interact with, even the folks that they ultimately may have to arrest for a commission of a crime, they are still part of that community. And that community policing is essentially is delved into every part of what they do out in the streets, treating everyone with respect, right? Even those that are, that are causing trouble, for example. Being part of the community. Instead of being in your police cars, you're walking the streets, you're saying hi to your neighbors, you're talking to the kids, who are playing basketball or something down the block, and I'm very forgive me, I am oversimplifying community policing, but it's ultimately it's a mentality. Ultimately, it's the mindset of the officer and a police organization to really serve the community in a way that you are part of that community.
Awesome. Yeah. So another thing I want to ask about is that, in the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, there is a big discussion between, communities of color, more specifically the Black community, and law enforcement. But I'm curious what you think of where Asian Americans fit in this bigger picture of what is happening. Because we have a lot of people, I think it's important to recognize the privileges we have as Asian Americans, but also, we don't have all the privileges in that sense. But, like you said earlier, we talked about in the previous segment, we were discussing, Vincent Chin and the Anti-Defamation League. Like, it's important for other communities to band together and support each other. And they have, been very supportive of the Asian American community as far as racism in the COVID-19 aspect. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on where Asian Americans fit in this bigger picture.
No, and I think the Asian Americans can have a part to play here when it comes to the overall discussion of police reform and criminal justice reform generally. I know, and to give an example, many cities, and give an example of the reform efforts that we're seeing in many parts of the country. Many cities, and I'll pick on Philadelphia, for example, many cities have created like citizen advisory commissions. And it's a way where residents of a community can come together. They are part of this commission, and purpose being is to oversee the police department and to advise and recommend on improved practices, right? And though many of those commissions often, pull from from a wide array of folks within the community. And I know in Philadelphia, we have many folks from the Asian American community who serve on those commissions. So, I think one example to your question, Zach, one example is where Asian Americans can be part of these discussions and part of the solution when it comes to developing really meaningful reforms when it comes to law enforcement. And then two, when it comes to, law enforcement, there are certainly unique challenges that impact Asian American communities. And of course, I touched on the immigration issue. And unfortunately, what we see is because we see the policies that come out of the federal government, many folks within the immigrant community, our community, are simply scared to call the police, right? They are scared to cooperate with police. They're scared to call 911. And that level of fear, I don't have to say, it's not good, right? It goes to public safety. It goes to the safety to our communities. If we can't rely, on police to keep us safe, and folks who are not willing to come forward, let's say, for example, in a domestic violence situation, if a victim is afraid to come forward because his or her immigration status is in question, right? And so those are unique challenges that face the immigrant community and very unique challenges that face our community. But there are a lot of police departments and a lot of law enforcement agencies out there that are trying to bridge that divide and create elements of trust. And I know here in New Jersey, and I think we may talk about this later, here in New Jersey, we have a policy where really it clearly delineates the job of local law enforcement and police in keeping communities safe, and which is separate and apart of what federal immigration authorities are doing in that sphere when it comes to the enforcement of federal immigration law. The two is different. And I know certainly in our communities, that distinction gets blurred, right? Police is police, state, local, federal, right? There's a lot of alphabet soup of agencies that are out there to try to keep track of, and to no one's fault. This is a lot to keep track of, right? But I know, at least in New Jersey, what we are doing here is really trying to clear that divide. That look, when it comes to state and local law enforcement, when it comes to police in your communities, we are not concerned of your immigration status, right? That, and unless there's like some exception that applies, police, when they stop you, for example, in a traffic stop, police here will not ask you for your immigration status. That's simply not a relevant consideration, whether or not you cross the red light, right? Mm-hmm. But that's the fear, though. That's the fear of so many folks in our community that they have. God forbid, if they are pulled over by the police, what happens to their immigration status? Are they going to be deported? Again, that's just one example, but there are certainly many ways where law enforcement practices do impact our community, where we should get involved and be part of that discussion.
Yeah. So I think what you're talking about is the Immigrant Trust Directive.
Yes.
So would you able to? I know we just discussed it a little bit, but I know you were working at Attorney General Kabir Graywal's office during that time, and so can you talk about why it's very significant that the state of New Jersey, you guys pushed out the Immigrant Trust Directive? What made that very significant?
Sure. No, and I think actually what was significant about it is because the Attorney General saw the palpable fear in our communities, and where anecdotally, if not more, hearing of instances where folks in our immigrant communities in New Jersey, and it's a huge community, especially in New Jersey, where there's this palpable fear. And so by pushing forward this policy, this directive, the Immigrant Trust Directive, and really sending the message that, look, state and local law enforcement, we have our role, we have our lane. Federal immigration authorities have their lane. And, as a policy matter, intermingling the two just creates a lot of confusion. And so what the policy ended up doing is creating a line where folks can be confident that when it comes to state and local law enforcement, unless it falls into, some of the narrow exceptions that the directive outlines, police will not ask for your immigration status. It is not, it will not, for the most part, be a consideration when it comes to, for example, a traffic stop, which is like a simple example, right? Where you don't have to worry that if you report a crime, if you report that you are a victim of domestic violence, that by simply cooperating with police will not subject you in and of itself to removal or deportation, right? That we want to make sure that we are building that trust so that folks can cooperate with police when it comes to, addressing, criminal aspects in our communities. And so I think that is a huge sea change. But at the same time, not totally unprecedented. We have many jurisdictions throughout the country, New York City, Philadelphia, so many in California, and I think California statewide, that they've enacted similar policies. They're really creating the distinction between what state local police, what the police officers in any community do versus what federal immigration authorities can do.
Yeah, so when we usually talk about these policies, they're in the context of like the Latino community. Would you say that they're just as important for the Asian American community as well?
Yeah, no, it certainly, it absolutely is, because, especially when it comes to immigration, right? I think, and forgive me, I should have looked up this statistic, but especially when it comes to the undocumented population within our country and in New Jersey, a good proportion of that, we'll have to look up the statistic later, but I remember that it's a good proportion it does intersect with the Asian American community, that the debate that we see that plays out on the federal level is uniquely impacting the Asian American community as well, along with the Latino community, that's for sure. So yeah, I mean, I think, we have to be part of that discussion when it comes to how we are going to improve and reform our immigration system.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll actually include those statistics in our show notes, so any listeners can take a look at them.
Yes, guys, don't forget to check out our website. All of the things that we mentioned in this interview today, in this episode, we will be including as many resources as we can in our show notes. But Rahat, before we let you go, we in the SituAsian Room have a set of questions that we ask every guest that comes onto our show. So it's a couple questions, and we're just going to get started now. So in your in your own opinion, what does it mean to be AAPI?
Yeah, that's a really great question. When it comes to being an Asian American here in the U.S., I think I think about it in three ways. One is I think about our past. I think about the folks that came well before us and the struggles that they've had in coming to the U.S. and creating a life and making a living and supporting their families. I think about my parents, not so different from the parents of so many of us, that came to this country, whether it's immigrants, as refugees, creating a new life. My parents, they were young, they were in their, I think my dad was in his mid-20s, my mom was younger than my dad, but they came to this country not knowing anyone. They came to have a better life, for economic opportunity, for stability, and to live here in the U.S., right? So I think, the immigrant experience, the refugee experience that we have in our communities, that's part of being an Asian American today. Thinking about what happened, what came before us and the generation that came before us. In the present today, being an Asian American today is fairly exciting, notwithstanding the challenges that face our communities. We make up 6% of the US population. Here in New Jersey, Asian Americans make up 10% of the population. Mm-hmm. One of the largest percentages out there in the country. And there's just so much promise that our community has, and we've seen there's more to go, but we've seen a good amount of progress already. I mean, who could have thought that today we would see on a presidential ticket an Asian American, right? that, she was already a star even before joining Vice President Biden's ticket. But to see that and to think that, one day she could be the president of the United States. I mean, that's just astonishing, right? Astonishing for so many of us. We have never seen anyone at that level that looked like us at all. And so there is a lot of promise today of being Asian American. We've seen so many folks that are reaching, roles of leadership and success. So there's a lot to look forward to. And that gets to the third point, right? The future. I think when it comes to the possibilities of what our community is going to look like in the decades ahead, that I am hopeful that we will be a much more vibrant voice when it comes to the issues that impact all of us in this country. That we're going to be a necessary voice further down the line as we are today. But like, I hope that improves more, right? That we are part of the fabric of this country. So I think, to me, I think that, and I could go on and on, but I think to me that kind of captures what it means to be Asian American today.
Definitely.
Awesome. All right, so food is often a bridge between people and a wonderful way to share one's culture with someone else. And so we want to know, what is your favorite Asian dish?
So I can't pick one. It's
Just
like,
give us some you love.
So many, right?
I know.
So, okay. One, I mean, I'd have to go back to like my childhood, being raised by two parents from Bangladesh. So my mom is a really great cook. And so I do miss at times, although I was over at my mom's just the other day. But like, I would say one of my favorites would be like Bengali home cooking. Whether it's like pulao, which is a type, a way to bake rice. It's a one rice dish that I really enjoy. And then other dishes, I mean, definitely like hot pot. I think I am missing hot pot a lot, going out to hot pot, because much to my wife's disappointment, we would be going, before COVID, we would go at least twice a month. It's probably not a good thing. But hot pot, definitely sushi's up there. Japanese food is up there, huge, right? Viet food up there.
Oh yeah.
Pho, obviously. And then, especially on like really like maybe special occasions, like Korean barbecue, and just like eating your face off. Like, it is amazing.
Jersey's the best place in like the region to get it.
Yeah.
No, I agree.
Totally.
In Jersey, sushi, Korean barbecue, and Vietnamese food, for some reason, it's always better. Like when I go home for breaks, I have to hit those three cuisines when I'm home.
Agreed. Totally agreed.
Okay, moving on. Rahat, who would you consider to be your AAPI role model?
That's a hard question too. And the reason that it's hard is that because there are so many folks that I either look up to or have met in my life, in my career, that I take like bits, take portions of the lessons that they've learned and sort of try to learn, learn something from them. And that list is pretty long when it comes to role models. I mean, I certainly would have to say, if I'm going to name one, I would have to say certainly my mom. And the reason I say that is, obviously everyone's parents are important, moms are important. But for me, my dad passed away when I was young, when I was a teenager, and my mom was left with me and my younger brother, and and that in and of itself can bring challenges for so many families who lose a parent, and trying to make ends meet and trying to raise a family. And with my mom, it was certainly, we had our share of challenges, growing up, but I think for my living through that, and my mom really, especially exercising grace and raising us and me and my brother during some really challenging times. I'm only here today because of my mom and raising us. So I would say if I was going to pick one, it would have to be my mom.
That's really nice to share. And so our last question is, how can people connect with you or learn more about you?
Sure. I mean, I think probably the two easiest ways would be LinkedIn. I think you could just type in my name on LinkedIn and find me. And also Twitter. Um, I believe my Twitter is it's essentially my name, Rahat underscore Babar. Very unoriginal and not creative, but
Hey,
I
that's
think you can easily find me though.
awesome.
Simple.
I'm
But
jealous. There's too many other Zach Ings, so I can't have just that, for like handles for social media. So there's got to be like some numbers or some weird order. So
Um, okay. Thank you again to Rahat Babar for taking the time to join us in the Situation Room. And thank you for your time and commitment to the AAPI community. It really does mean a lot, especially with everything happening now. And I agree with you when you answered our first question, what does it mean to be AAPI? It's in three parts. What we've done in the past, what we're doing right now, and what's coming for in the future. So thank you for all that you do and for taking the time to sit with us in the Situation Room today. Guys, if you are interested in anything that was mentioned during our interview, check out our show notes. Like I mentioned before, all of the show notes for this episode will be on our website, www.situationroom.com.
awesome.
Great.
Thank you so much, Rahat.
Great. Thank you both. And thank you for doing this podcast. You guys have really great conversations. I'm glad you're doing it.
Her name was Alicia.
Hey guys, welcome back to Dish It Out. So last week, Zach and I challenged each other to dive deeper into the AAPI community and look up some dishes from different Asian American Pacific Islander cuisines. But this week, we're gonna bring it back home and talk about some of our favorite foods from our own cultures. So, like always, I'll go first. This week, I'm so excited. I'm gonna be talking about ube, which is one of the most popular desserts in the Philippines. It's a purple yam. It's like sweet purple yam. It's very similar to taro, but I think for me, I think ube is a little bit sweeter.
Okay.
Have you tried it before, Zach?
I have not, but you sent me pictures of it, and I was like, "Is that taro?" And you were like, "No." I was like, "Oh."
There are so many ways that you can use ube. I mean, at school with my Filipino association, we always, whenever we do big dinners, when people ask about dessert, I always try and have a tray of ube makapuno, which is ube halaya, which is like a more of like you can slice the ube. It's mixed with coconut,
Ooh,
young shredded coconut and maraschino cherries,
what?
which
That
is
sounds so
amazing.
good.
You can serve it as you can serve it with bread. So ube halaya is like a spreadable ube. It's like a jam, and my family, like for me at least, I spread it on pandesal, which is Philippine sweetbread,
Ooh.
and I eat it as like a spread. You can mix it with literally anything. It's served as bubble tea or boba. Um, it's served as ice cream. Actually, I'm so excited I'm talking about this for this episode because my mom just came back from the grocery store like not even 2 hours ago, and when I was helping her unload the car, I saw a big tub of ube ice cream from Magnolia's. And to all my Filipino people out there, you guys know that Magnolia ice cream is the best ice cream around. But yeah, it's so good. Um, like I said, ube makapuno is a classic. It's ube with shredded young coconut, and my favorite's the ice cream. I use the ice cream in everything. It's served in halo halo, which is what we talked about a couple dish it outs ago. It's also on our website, and I talk about ube ice cream on there. But yeah, if you're gonna introduce anyone to Filipino cuisine, ube is a staple. You need to introduce, like, that's like one of the first things you have to introduce someone that knows nothing about Filipino cuisine. You need to show them ube.
How do I get ube?
You can get it at your local Filipino restaurant or supermarket. They will have it either as, so when in my Filipino supermarket that's close to my house, they have it in the refrigerated section in little like trays, and it's just straight ube.
Okay.
It's just straight ube, ube makapuno. But you can also get it in a jar as ube halaya or ube jam.
Hmm.
And then I also wanted to try and make ube flavored pandesal, which is the sweet
Ooh.
bread. And they actually have it in a powder form that you mix with the flour. And the
Okay.
ube flavor is baked throughout the entire bread.
Wow. That sounds good.
Hmm.
That sounds like I love bread. I just ate a bunch this today.
But yeah,
Uh,
I love that I'm talking about ube right now just because I'm still thinking about the ice cream that my mom brought home, and I know that once we're done with this episode, I'm going downstairs and I'm getting some ice cream.
that sounds so good. Yeah, I can't say I've tried it, but I really want to. That sounds fire. But the dish I'm bringing to the shadow table is very different from ube. Not sweet, more of a savory kind of filling thing. But I'm talking about sticky rice dumplings or lo mai gai. Do you know what I'm talking about? I don't.
Yes.
They're wrapped
I
in a
love it.
banana leaf.
Yes.
And you got like a filling inside. Usually it's like lapchung or like Chinese sausages. You got like mung bean sometimes in there. Like some people would use egg, chicken. Like you could put a lot of different things in there. But the rice is always like sticky and molded together, and the leaf on the outside that it's wrapped in is actually banana leaf. And this actually, like, there's a lot of different types of sticky rice and banana leaves. It's like a very common Asian thing, and like in Thai culture, they have like a dessert version. um, but I absolutely love these. My grandma used to like make a gigantic Ziploc bag full of like, oh my guys,
Mhm.
and I would just like heat them up for like lunch or breakfast, and they are amazing.
We have actually a version of that in the Philippines. It's called Suman.
Hmm.
There's no filling inside of it, but the Suman, it's just wrapped in the banana leaf and it's just the sticky rice.
Ooh.
And I remember, yeah, like you said, it comes like, you get it in like the big plastic bag from your grandmother. My
Hmm.
grandmother also brings it in a big plastic bag. Just it's frozen and then we steam it.
Hmm.
And I remember just like when I'm hanging out with my cousins, my aunt will always, you know, ask us what we want for, dessert or something. Because you said, you guys have it as a savory dish, but in the Philippines, it's more of a dessert.
Interesting.
And I get so excited when my aunt will be like, "Oh, we have suman," and bring out like a plate filled with just the banana leaves, like the little banana leaf packets. And I
Hmm.
already know I know it's suman, and I get so excited.
Yeah, I love that. I know like sometimes the way they prepare it is like everyone's got their own different way, but they make like there's a way to wrap it in like a triangle. And then you put like rice on the bottom, then like you're filling, then rice on the top, and it's wrapped in the triangle. And then like,
Hmm.
that banana leaf is then wrapped in twine, and there's a
Yeah.
giant long string of them, and then they just like boil them all, so it like molds together, kind of.
Okay, kind of like onigiri, right?
Kind of,
In
but
like in terms of like the shape and like the way that it's structured.
it's like a weird isosceles triangle where like the two sides
Oh.
are like really long and then like
Mhm.
the other side is super long. Yeah. I don't know. That was a terrible description. But like imagine a really, really wide camping tent kind of
I'm glad that
triangle,
Zach
but
was
also a prism. I didn't-
I'm glad Zach was actually able to apply those, concepts that we learned in high school math that we thought that we never were going to use ever again. Zach, you
describe
just used it now.
to
Congratulations.
describe oh my guy. Yep. Thank you to my high school math teachers. I can now describe rice dumplings.
Beautiful.
But as always, API dishes are beautiful and they're very diverse. As we just talked about with the Oh My Guy, there's so many, different spins on it. And, we want to hear from you and the recipes of the API community. So send us your recipes via social media or submit them on our website. We have a lot of different dish out content and, we love to share, Asian cuisines. So make sure to check that out.
Yes, guys, don't forget to check out our Dish Out blog on our website. Like Zach was saying, we have dishes that we've talked about on our episode, including clips. We'll have blog posts on different recipes, and there's so much more. So definitely check it out. But that pretty much wraps up Dish It Out for this week.
Thank you again to Rahat Babar for coming into the Situation Room. It was a lot of fun having you as a guest. And thank you all for tuning into this episode, making it this far. And if you've made it this far to episode 10 and been supporting us through the way, thank you again. We truly appreciate your support in our journey through Asian America. It really pushes us to keep forward and making new episodes. And as always, the Situation Room is produced by Crimson Planet Media. Make sure to check out our website, situationroom.com, for show notes. Follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook at The Situation Room for more content.
Guys, don't forget to also subscribe to us on YouTube or whatever platform you use to tune into our show. And also, we have a newsletter out. If you want to get all the updates from the Situation Room, as well as exclusive content from our show, definitely check out our website, click on the newsletter tab, and sign up today. But as always, we want to hear from you guys. So send us messages and recipes through our website, slide into our DMs on Instagram, send us messages on Facebook. Let us know what you guys want us to talk about in the Situation Room next. But as always, thank you again for joining us on this step of our journey through Asian America. Once again, my name is Emilie Villaverde.
And I'm Zach Gang. You want to do this next weekend?
Yeah, we're already 10 episodes in.
Yeah,
we
that's
gotta.
right. We got it. True. All right. See you
Bye,
next
guys.
time. Bye.
Perfect.
All right, that's going to wrap it up.